questions during the meeting, please feel free to like raise your hand or type it in. I don't think I can see the chat. Yeah, so just raise your hand and I'll see what's up. Okay, all right, it's 1:30 and we're gonna get started with the workshop. So my name is James Chu. I am your workshop host for the day. I was the co-director for MassEX last year, so yeah, it's great to be back and talking to everyone again. We're doing intro to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript today, and the key for the workshop is right here. I'm gonna see if I can type it in the chat here as well, so you guys can all. Oh well, someone's already posted the chat. That's cool, but yeah. All right, I have my chat open too. So you guys have any questions, feel free to type in the chat as well. I'll be able to see it. Okay, so let's get started with the workshop. So starting off with the first component of the day, we're going to be learning some basics of HTML. So okay, before I get started, actually, I'd like everyone to open the workshop repository and the README file that I made, because it has the notes to the lecture, and it's going to be helpful if you can follow along on there. So I just sent it in the chat. Yeah, if you just open that, you should see the outline and the notes for the lecture today. So like it should help you like follow on stuff. All right, cool. I'm assuming everyone is able to get that open. So let's get started. Okay, so the first component of today's workshop is on HTML. So HTML is the core component behind a website, right? This is the thing that your browser loads and has all of the data on it for the website. And the file behind this usually is called the index file, right? So usually when you open like a browser to a directory, it's going to look for the index.html file. So for example, if you open the 7-week challenge website, right, the file right there is actually the index.html file. So on the web server, there's going to be a file called that. Now, since we're just working on our local computers today with a text editor, which I hope you downloaded, and just any generic web browser, you don't really need to do this and have a web server set up, because you can just open the HTML file in your browser like this. So for example, like I'll show you how I so I just like dragged the file to my URL here and just pressed enter, and you should be able to open this. Or if you just double click the HTML file, it should open it by default in your browser, which lets you kind of preview what it looks like when you add something. Okay, cool. So getting started, for now, I'm gonna put this over here as well. Cool. So starting off, HTML is the language that is kind of used to define this. It's a markup language used to define the website structure, right? As you can see, this is kind of what HTML looks like. It has these little weird arrow things that indicate the beginning of like a tag. And yeah, it's kind of this kind of like hierarchical structure, kind of like a tree, once you visualize it in a way. So, if you just go to any website, for example, let's just pick, the 7-week challenge website, right? And you go to here and you click view page source, you should see something like this. So all of this is HTML and is what we're going to be going over for the first part of our class today. So as you'll notice, the tags are generally in this format where you have an opening tag, the content inside the tag, and a closing tag, right? You always have to close your tags or there will be an error. So you can see here, so we start off with the HTML tag, right? So everything in here is the content of our website in this little chunk over here. And we have to close the HTML tag afterwards. Same thing with the head tag, we close it. The title tag, which is where our page title will go, which is the little thing you see at the top here, right? All of these tags have to be closed. So now let's kind of run through some of these basic tags. I'm assuming you guys have this open on your own screen, so I'm gonna just focus on this section over here. Let me get rid of some of this thing that we'll go over later, but okay, let's go through everything together. So let's say I wanted to make this little sample website thing that I had in the document in the beginning right there. Okay, cool. So as always, we want to start off with the HTML tag and we want to close it. It's just good habit. And then the head is where miscellaneous information that really isn't displayed to the user goes. So let's close that as well. So one of the things we have here is the title tag. The title tag is like the little bit of text that you see at the top of the browser. So if you look over here, right now it says 7wc.html, which is just the name of the file. But usually you want to show something more descriptive, right? So we can write something like intro to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we're going to close the title tag. And if we reload the page now, you'll see that this is what it says now in the title bar. So this is obviously pretty helpful. And usually when you're making a website, the content of the website goes inside the body tag, which is like the body of the website, right? So over here, you can see we have an H1 tag, which means a heading, right? H1 is the biggest heading, so it goes from 1 to 6. The bigger the number is, the smaller the heading is, right? So you can think of it as like the hierarchy. 1 is at the top of the hierarchy, and as you move down, you get to 6. You can kind of think of this as like a heading you have in a Word document, or like Pages or whatever you use, right? It goes from like heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, etc., all the way down. So this is like the exact same concept. So we can just write something like an awesome website, and we should see over here an awesome website. Yep, Serena, you have a question? You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask it.
Okay, so this is kind of like not related to what you're doing right now, but I don't have the HTML downloaded on the laptop because this is not my laptop, so I don't know what I should do.
Oh yeah, no problem. So HTML isn't really a language you need to download like Python or like Java, right? It's built into all browsers. So anytime you open a website, you're really loading HTML. Okay, let's not watch myself talk. That's gonna be weird. Okay, so like if you just open the HTML file in your browser, it should be able to view it. You don't need anything special installed.
Okay, I'm just gonna go to a website that I've done HTML on and hope that works.
Okay, yeah. So the Doctype HTML thing usually goes at the top of the page. Like it's not really essential anymore. Like browsers know what to do without it, but yeah, it's good practice to have it at the top anyways. Yeah, don't really need to have it though. Cool. All right, so let's kind of move on from that. Great. Yeah, so guys, if you have any questions, feel free to either type in the chat or raise your hand. It's probably easier if you raise your hand and talk, just because the chat, sometimes I can't like concentrate on it. Okay, so if you want the check-in tag, it should be somewhere in the chat, but I'll send it again. And Farhan, that's a good point. Save your file as a .html file. I forgot to mention it. You can call it whatever you want, but make sure you save it as a .html file. And then you can double click it and open it in your browser. Great. Okay. So as I was talking about the headings, it's kind of like the word heading. So if we say H2, this is called a second level heading. You'll see that it will be smaller than the H1 heading, right? You can see it's a bit smaller, and kind of keeps on going on and on. Yeah, so we make this like an H3. Let's call this third. You'll see here that it's smaller, right? So kind of like the headings you have in a document. I think this is pretty, like, it's pretty basic, but you use this a lot of times, and it's good to understand that they're kind of like headings, so they demark like sections of text that you want to like give headings for. Okay, so next tag we're going to be talking about that's really commonly used is the p tag. So this is the paragraph text tag, and this is where like a paragraph of text is usually go. So go on like a blog website, right? They have like a massive chunk of text. All of that text is usually in a p tag. So for example, we can copy over just like a chunk of the website text over here, of the lecture text, and just post it in here. And if we load the page, you'll see that it's over here, just normal text. So all of this right now looks kind of pretty much like a Word document, right? It's just text. It doesn't look very interesting. Well, there's a couple more interesting things that we can do that you can't really do with a Word document. So one of those things is loading in an image. So that's what you would do with the image tag, right? Which is img. And what you would do is do this. I'm going to close the tag. Well, maybe not like that. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, before we close the tag, we should probably enter in the link that we want the picture to be displayed with. which is this src thing, right? So you want to say image src equals quotation marks, and you want to put a link to an image inside these quotation marks. So I'm going to choose this lovely picture of the new Apple iMacs, which is always great to have. And if we then load this, well, actually, I made it the iPhone 12, not the iMac. That comes later, but yes, you'll see that an image is loaded in. So you want to do image and then src equals the link to the image. Now, yeah, any questions so far? Okay, great. If no one has any questions, I'm going to keep on going about the images. So as I'm mentioning in this thing over here, the image link can either be a URL, which is what this is, or it can also be a relative file link, right? So let's kind of showcase how that works. So let's say we found an image online. Let's just find an image. Let's find orange. Okay, so just for a bit of reference, my 7-week challenge HTML files in my downloads folder. So I'm going to find a picture of an orange, and I'm going to save it to my downloads folder. Right, and let's call this orange.jpg, 2 dots. Okay, so you'll see it's going into my downloads folder as well, and it's in there now. Okay, so we want this to show an image of a orange. We will just say orange.jpg, and this will load the orange picture that's in the same folder. So keep in mind, if you want to have the image in here, it's a relative path, right? It's a path, it's a file path from your HTML file. So if I had this in, like, for example, a folder, I would do, okay, so let's do that right now. Let's put this in a folder. Let's make a folder and call it, okay, so how does one make a folder? There we go, new folder, images. And we can put orange.jpg inside here. So then here we would do images/orange.jpg. Right, and you'll see it still works. It's the rough idea here. Okay, cool. Any questions so far? Great. So the next tag that we're going to talk about today is the a tag, or like the link tag, right? This lets you create a link to either like a file or a URL again. So kind of different from the image tag is instead of src, it's href. And inside here, you'd put so it's src equal. Sorry, let me see if I can zoom in a little. Does that help? Yes, the image size can be changed. That's something that we can talk about in the next section when we talk about CSS. There is an older way of doing it where you set like width and height like inside here, but it's kind of old. It's not really common anymore to do that. Okay, so the application I'm using right now, so the browser is just like the Edge browser. It's the default one that comes as Windows. Any like recent web browser should work. In fact, the HTML we're doing today, like anything from the last like 30 years should work too. This text editor over here, Sublime Text. But again, like anything that's text editor, plain text editor should work. Cool. Okay. Just checking in. Can everyone see this text better? Do you want me to make it bigger, or is this a good size? Great. Thank you. All right. So a little bit differently from the image tag, instead of doing src, you do href, and inside here, again, you either put a relative file link or you put a URL. Right, so if we wanted to, for example, link to the 7-week challenge website, we would just take this link, paste it in here, and then inside, in between the close tag, well, let's make the close tag over here. In between the close tag over here, you put the link that you want to be displayed for the link. So let's just give an example over here. Let's just call this 7 weeks challenge website. And you'll see this link over here. I'm going to get rid of this image just to make things easier. Okay. I'm going to zoom in a bit here too, so you guys can see this better. So this is kind of like a link that you would make in like a Word document or Google Doc as well. You give it like a link destination that you want it to go to, and you give it some text that you want displayed for the link. So if we click this 7-week challenge website, it takes us here, right? And again, this also works for relative file paths as well. So we want this link to go to an image. We can say orange picture and say images/orange.jpg. Right, and then if we click here now, it brings us this orange picture. All right, so that's the rough idea here over some of these basic HTML tags. But again, there is a lot of HTML tags over here in HTML, and there's really a lot of them, and it's not really too efficient to go over every single one of them because some of them are really rarely used and not too common and stuff. So yeah, all right. I have the link on the doc, but I'm gonna send in the chat again. This is a really good reference for any HTML like web related stuff. All the tags should be like on this website, W3 Schools. And yeah, all right. So let's go over a quick example. This works best if you follow along on your own computer as well and customize it to yourself. Okay. So the quick example we're going to be doing for this HTML section before we move on to CSS is like building a really basic personal website, right? And for the challenge today, like this little quick one, we want a website that displays your name, your school, and a short biography, and show a small image underneath that as well. Great. So we can probably just wipe most of this and get started from scratch. Cool. So let's start with the name, right? And since this is our personal website, we want this to be in really big text because we are very proud of who we are. So my name is James, and I'm just going to put that there. Feel free to put your name and reload the page. This is what we see, right? H1 tag, big title. And we also want to display our school. Now, your school identity is not as important as your personal identity, so we're probably going to use a smaller heading, right? So let's say H2, and I'm at McGill University, so I'm going to say that. And there we go. You can probably put like your high school, your middle school, your elementary school, your school, feel free to put it there. And then we want to have a short biography, right? So since a short biography is like bigger piece of text, we don't really want to use a heading, so we're going to use a paragraph text for that. And well, I already have this pre-written, but like I'm going to just copy it over. You guys feel free to write your own little thing. So Kevin, good question. You don't have to use any special program. Any text editor that's a plain text editor and a web browser should work. If anyone has any questions about how to get this all set up, like please feel free to raise your hand and ask, and then I can like go over this more specifically.
Is it possible you could go over this more specifically, please?
Yeah, sure, definitely. Okay.
Thank you.
So let's pretend we're starting from scratch, right? All right. So what text editor is everyone using? Okay, I'm gonna just say Sublime Text for now. So if I make a new file, right, I can just call it whatever. It's called Untitled right now, so I want to save it somewhere. And I'm gonna save it to my downloads folder, but you can save it to your desktop or your documents folder. I'm gonna save it to my downloads, and I'm gonna call this workshop material, or I'll just call workshop.html. So the .html part is pretty important if you want your like system to be able to pick it up so that you can double click to open it. Right. So I'm gonna save workshop.html. Right. So that's now saved in my downloads folder. And I'm gonna put some like simple thing, let's just say h1 like file. Cool. So now if I go in my file explorer, you'll see that you should have workshop.html somewhere in the folder. And on Windows, you should see like the icon of your web browser, right? If you're on Mac, you might see Safari, Firefox, or something, or you might just see a file. But if you double click this, it's going to open it in your web browser. And if that doesn't work, like say, for example, you got .html bound to your text editor, what you can also do is just like open a tab, drag the file to like the top here, and it should put in the path, right? Like say we were on this, like we're just on a new tab page. If you drag this in here, it should paste in the URL and you can open it. Cool. So does that make more sense, or does anyone still have any questions about getting this set up?
Sorry if this is really weird, but I don't have like the thing like downloaded. Like I don't have the HTML like the thing downloaded. Sorry, I'm blanking.
Yeah, so you don't need any special thing to run HTML. You just need a web browser. Like it's not really like a programming language. It's more like a descriptive markup thing, right? So if you just write something that's valid HTML, you can just open it in your browser. You don't need to install anything. Does that help? Or were you talking about the text editor?
The text editor.
Okay, I see. Right. So I think we put that on the list of required workshop materials, but it's fine if you haven't downloaded it. Something I would recommend is Sublime Text. It's like pretty quick to download. I think it's like pretty small. So you can download this, put it in the chat as well. But failing that, if you have anything else like Visual Studio Code or even, or as Alexander said, you can just use Notepad. That should work too. You don't have the nice syntax highlighting and stuff, but it's still functional. If you're on a Mac, you can use Text Editor. So in general, home pages are called index.html, but in the context of this workshop, since we're not serving it with a web browser, with a web server, we don't really need to worry about it. You can call it whatever you want. Cool. Okay. So now just kind of finishing up on the HTML section before we move on to the CSS section. Okay. So I'm going to copy this text here. Yeah, okay, well, I already pasted the text here. So now if we reload the page, you'll see something like this. So you can make this whatever you want. You can really just have fun with that. And we also want to show a small image underneath. And so what we want to do is, again, make an image. And then we put in a link to an image. And being an Apple fan, we are going to put in a picture of the new iMacs. There we go. All right, if I zoom out a little, we should see it better. Cool. Is everyone on the same page about how we got here? Or does anyone have any questions? Great. All right. So now let's talk about CSS. As you can probably see, this looks really boring and ugly. I think this is Times New Roman. No one likes Times New Roman. And if we're making a website, we want something that looks a bit better, right? And to do this, we are going to use CSS. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and as you can probably judge by the name, it's for styling things. The most common way to kind of define CSS styles is to create a CSS file. So a CSS file is just a plain text file with extension .css, and we link it to an HTML file with a link tag that usually goes in the head section of your HTML file. So now it's probably becoming a bit more clear that the head section, which I forgot to include. Yeah, so you can see without the title tag and the head tag, we just have 7-week challenge.html, and that's kind of boring. But if we do like title and say like James this, now it says James here at the top. All right. So CSS is like pretty commonly defined in a CSS file. You can also do inline CSS, which is like we're not going to really do today. It's kind of bad form. Or the other thing you can do is do style, and everything you write here will be CSS, like inside here. Yeah. But like it's good practice to learn how to link a CSS file. So we're going to do that. We're going to call this main.css. And we're going to save it in the same folder as your 7-week challenge.html. We don't want to call it that. Never mind. We're going to call it main.css. Cool. And then over here, we want to link to it, which with the link tag. And here we use the rel thing and cool. Now, CSS is a bit of an interesting language. So the way it works is you have selectors and declarations. Selectors specify what elements a set of declarations apply to, and declarations are a key value pair for CSS properties and its desired value. So like, let's do a quick example here, and say we wanted to make all the paragraph text in this page yellow. So in main.css, we would say we want to select the paragraph tag, so everything that has the paragraph tag, and inside these curly brackets is our key value pairs, which is our declarations. Great. So to change the text color, you just do color. And if you were around for last year's Math Hacks, take note, it's not text-color, it's just color. So yeah, let's just say color yellow. So now if we load this page, well, did we link it? It should have been yellow. Wait a second. Huh. All right. That is very interesting. let's figure out what is going on here. Okay, for some reason it's not loading the latest. Did I press save here? All right. Yeah, so I don't know what's happening with my computer, but it's not loading the latest version anymore. Oh, no, it is. Okay. Well, I'm not sure what happened here. Okay. Right, okay, my bad. It's not rel equals this. It's rel equals style sheet. That's the type, and it's href equals main.css. Yeah, my bad. I messed up the notes from last. There we go. Okay. There we go. The text is now yellow, but that's kind of hard to read, so let's just make it red. That is a bit better. All right, there we go. So this is how you link a CSS file to a HTML file. And take note, it's not rel equals the link, it's rel equals style sheet, and href equals the relative file path link. I'm going to update my notes with that shortly, but yeah, keep that in mind. So my apologies. Okay, does anyone have any questions at this point? Evan, did you have a question? Cool. Okay, great. So okay, so we don't change the. Okay, yeah, this is what we did in the CSS file. So I didn't change the color of the text by going to another tab in the text editor. So we have, okay, so the other tab is just another file I've opened, which is main.css, right? And then we put in some CSS here. So this is what CSS looks like. So we selected everything with the P tag, which is like this tag over here. And we're saying that the color of it will be red. Does that make sense, or does anyone still have any questions? Cool. All right. Okay. So there's other ways to select beyond just using the name of the tag itself. So there's actually like three kind of most common ways to. Does Canadian spelling work? That is a really good question. Probably not. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Yeah, sorry about that. Canadian spelling doesn't work. But you know, I'm American, so we can just use American spelling anyways. Cool. Okay. So the three main common ways of selecting elements is either with the element name, which is like the P here for like paragraph, or you can like say like H1 here, for example, color red. That makes the header red, or like H2. You guys probably get the rough idea here. Yeah. The other two ways that are more specific is with class and ID. So class is like kind of like a class of things. You're selecting multiple elements to have something in relation. And there's also ID, which, you know, like a personal ID, it's unique to something. So this is when you want to select, like IDs for when you want to select something unique. So for example, if we wanted to make a class called like page headers, right? Yeah, again, this is how you define a class. By saying class equals like the name of your class inside like the beginning of one of these HTML tags. And to specify multiple classes, you put a space in between them. You can say like another class. Yeah. So we gave H1 and H2 both the class page headers. So instead of like making, you know, like two things that say like color red, right? We can just use the class to make all of these things red. And to do that, we use the dot symbol. So dot specifies a class name, and then we just put another, not another, page headers. That's what I called it. Page headers, color red. So yeah, both of these should be red, and we make this like green. It'll be green. Great. And yeah, so there's multiple things to select other than color as well. There's a couple of things over here that we can go through. There's, you know, background, which sets the background of element, border, which specifies like a border around an element, You can also change the font family, which is like the font name, basically. Like if you're using like Arial, Times New Roman, Helvetica, and size is like the actual size of the font, and weight is like whether or not it's like bold. So let's kind of do this too. Let's say we want the heading 1 to be unique, right? Because it's the main heading. And we call this ID name, like name heading. Cool. And then we wanted to make this a different font, right? So take note of the fact that we're only making one thing with an ID, right? It's bad practice to give multiple things the same ID because the whole idea of an ID is for it to be specific. Great. So here to select an ID, we use the hashtag symbol, and we'd say hashtag name dash heading, and I'll showcase the font family thing in action. So let's make this, what's a cool font? Let's make this Arial. It's not a cool font, but let's keep going. So you'll see that this is, sure, we can make it Wingdings. I don't even know if that works, but yeah, it does work. Cool. Exactly. So this is what happens when you use the ID, right? So we're only changing the specifics of this one class. And this is the other thing with HTML, right? The things kind of like stack and like link together and like inherit each other as well. So if we're setting the color of the page headers to green, anything with the class page headers will be green. But if we call it, if we give it an ID of name dash heading and we set the font family to be Wingdings, right? The things come together. So we have text that's both green and font family Wingdings. We can make this another font too. We can make it Avenir. I don't think it comes with Windows. So yeah, you just get like the default font. There's other cool things you can do with this as well. So font weight, you can set this to bold, and this will make your text bold. But that only works if you have like the bold version of the font linked in as well. So that's like the easier way to do that would be to just go here and do this, which should also work if I can type, which I can't. What did I type here? Whoops. That is, yeah, but the bold font, as you can see, the bold font of the bold version of the font is not loaded, so it doesn't really work. But yeah, if you had that, it was going to work. Okay, so that's actually really that's a good question. It's actually a really challenging part of HTML. You can't really easily change the colors of each specific font. You'd have to put it in like a separate element. So one thing you can do is a span, and I think that should work. Like if we make this, yeah, and then this is inline CSS. So if we say style is equal to color red, that'll make shoe red. But as you can see, this is kind of messy. And it's kind of hard to read anyway. So it's not really like a common thing to change the color of like each text item like that. Cool. Yeah. Now, okay, so I think someone asked in the beginning, but like they asked how you would change the size of an image, right? And what we can do is we can use CSS to do that. So let's call this like image, we'll give it an ID of like iMac. And what we can do here is inside this CSS file is we can use the height and width to change it. So let's say we want to give this a height of 500 pixels and a width of 200 pixels. As you can see, it's a little squashed and ugly looking because this image is not meant to be like that. So usually it's better practice to just set like one of them or something so you don't set both and squash the image, right? We can make this like 100 pixels too, and it'll just make the whole thing smaller. But as you can see, if we set both aspects and it's not the same ratio as the image was, like if we make this like 1000 px, you can see it's going to look really weird. So we don't want to do that. That looks bad. Cool. Any questions so far? Cool. Let's move on then. So kind of finishing up with the CSS, right? What are some other things we can talk about here? Let's see. Border is pretty cool. So let's give name heading a border. So border is kind of like complicated syntax, but this, I think, if I remember correctly, should work. And you'll see here that it gives my name like a red border that is 2 pixels wide. It's a solid border and it's in red color. So like all of these kind of like specific things should be available on the CSS documentation thing I linked here, which I'm also going to post in the chat again. So feel free to refer to this. This workshop is just giving you a quick overview of, so the workshop goes to 2:30. Right. And as like, okay, as someone pointed out, I forgot that headers are already bold. I'm an idiot. So that is why the bolding did nothing. But if we make the paragraph text like font weight bold, you'll see the text is now like bold. Cool. My bad. So there's also a couple of other things you can do here with text alignment. So if we wanted to center the text, we can say use text align. This is called the option. There's center, there's left, there's right, etc. So let's do center for now. And you'll see that all the headings should be now centered. Okay, cool. There's a couple of other things with margin and padding that we'll go through as well. So margin is the spacing kind of between elements on the outside. So if we wanted more space between James Hsu and McGill University, we can go for page headers over here. So this covers both of them. So we set the margin, and you can see here that you can set the margin for the right, the top, the bottom, and the left. You can set it for like all 4 corners. And if you do like just the default margin, you have to set it for all of them. So the default is like 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 for 0 margin. Well, okay, actually it's not 0. That's my mistake. But yeah, there's a default one in and stuff. But okay, let's just say the margin for the top, we want to make this 10 pixels. There we go. All right, so that makes the margin for the top here. So let's see if I can show this better. So if you inspect element and look in here, you'll probably, let's see, there's, okay. So this kind of explains the, I don't know if I can zoom in on here, but where was it? Okay. So like in the inspect element part of your like browser, you should be able to visualize this stuff. So here we set the margin to be 10 pixels at the top. And you can see here that if we like hover over the element, we can like hover over margin, we can see there's like a 10 pixel thing at the top. And so the default is like here, it's like 90, there's a default margin here as well. Yeah. And we can do like margin left. Move everything a bit to the left. Or like margin from the right. So margin like dash whatever direction gives you the margin from that direction. So if we do margin right, you'll see that like the margin is pushes everything like 10 pixels from the right over as well. The other thing is padding, and that's a bit different from margin in that it's the spacing inside the element, right? So if we do, let's say, here. Let's do the one with the border, so it's a bit more clear. So I set the padding to 10 pixels, right? You'll see that it adds like 10 pixels of space like inside of the inside here between like the main element inside here and like the outside of the border. This is where it adds the spacing. But you can see it doesn't affect the spacing between these two elements. But if I made this margin instead, you'll see that the red border will still be the same size, but it's going to add space on the outside between these two things. So to give multiple classes to one element, you put a space inside here. So now we said class equals page headers. We can just say class equals like another class. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. Does anyone have any questions about CSS? Because next thing we're going to move on is talking about some JavaScript. Great. Let me just check if anyone's any hands raised. No? Okay, cool. So for this, we probably want to, you guys can probably make a new file so you still have the save, but I'm just going to delete this. And yeah, we're going to delete like all of this too. Okay, so for the JavaScript part, let's kind of see how this works. So JavaScript is like the programming language that lets us create like dynamic and interactive websites, right? This is like the kind of like the more programming part of web development, the part where you like write like conventional code and logic. Yeah. So, but keep in mind that JavaScript is like loaded and run by the user, so you don't want to put anything sensitive in there because they can just like change it and access it, right? Or like anything that you don't want them to control. Like if you were making like a video game, you wouldn't want, like their like your users let's say like bank account balance to be controlled on the client side, right? Because they can just like edit the JavaScript file and give themselves like $1 million or something. So we don't want to do that. So the way we can link JavaScript is with the script tag. And there's two ways of doing this. You can either link a JavaScript file, so we can give it a file like main.js, and then it will run the JavaScript from this file. So let's new file and call it main.js, right? So it's going to load the JavaScript from this file and run it. So we now reload the page. You'll see if we go to like, for example, like the network inspector, it should be loading main.javascript here. So right now, since our JavaScript file is blank, we don't have anything happening on here, right? But let's just go over very simple and let's say console.log hello world. So this is like the equivalent of like hello world in like any other language. And if you run this and you go to your browser console, you should see hello world, right? So this is what console.log does. It logs the text you give here to the browser console. And on most browsers, I think to open the developer console, you can just like click inspect element, like view page source, and navigate to the console, or press F12 on your keyboard if you have that. Now, in terms of JavaScript syntax, well, before we do that, something else you can also do is have it inline inside the HTML file. So if we do that, we can also just write the file, the JavaScript here, and do console.log like hi. And now if we run this file, we'll do both. But you'll see that it ran main.js before it ran the script tag, just because this came first over here. Okay, so in terms of syntax for JavaScript, it's really similar to like a lot of programming languages. It's really similar to Java and like C and C++, and like to an extent, like kind of like Python, right? It's kind of like Python in that you don't need to declare variable types. So if you're familiar with a language like Java, you know you have to declare things as integers or strings. But in JavaScript, like Python, you can just like do pretty much anything. Right, so you can do things like, so to declare a variable, use the word let and the variable name. So we can say like let age equals 10, and this will work perfectly fine. Right, well, it's not gonna, and then I'm just gonna console.log age here, and it should output 10 to the console. There we go, it puts 10 to the console. Right, so you can see here, there's kind of not really any types of JavaScript. And if we wanted to like do this, like name equals James, console.log name, you'll see it's pretty happy with that too. And like Python, you can also switch things between types. So if I say like age is equal to name, let's not do it here actually. Yeah. So if I say over here that like age is equal to name, it's not going to complain about any types or anything, and it's just going to print James twice. So I hope that's pretty familiar for everyone. And you can do math like pretty standardly as with all other languages. So I can select name age plus 8. We'll get 18. Can do age minus 8. Get 2. Age times 8. We'll get 80. Age divided by 8. And you'll notice here that here gives us a decimal number. So this is, again, kind of different to a language like Java or C, where if you divide two integers, you still get an integer. Java is kind of like Python in that, JavaScript is kind of like Python in that you still get a decimal number if you do math here. Yeah, and you can also do exponents with the math.pow. Select the power. You do the number, comma, the exponent. So 82, we should get 64. Oh, reloading the wrong one. 64. Cool. And all right. Something else you can do that you've probably seen before, mainly with like ad pages, is you can do alert. So alert sends like a browser alert. So let's just say hello. And this is kind of annoying, but it gives you this page says hello thing, right? So we don't really want to do this because this really annoys a lot of people, and it's very disruptive. Okay. Something else you can do is, so for sure you can log variables. You can say like hello, then plus the user's name. Then it should log hello James. So like Python, you can add strings like this. Pretty intuitive and cool. Any other questions so far with JavaScript? Feel free to ask anything that you're confused about. Okay, cool. I'm gonna keep on going then. So yeah, can we use other languages in HTML? No, if you wanted to run it in the browser, okay, well, it's a complicated answer. If you just want your browser to run it really easily, like straight up, like inside the HTML file, it's pretty much just JavaScript, but there's new things you can do with WebAssembly that lets you run different languages. So the script tag doesn't go in the head. It just goes in the, it goes at the end of the file. Yeah. You want it at the end of the body. So it's not, yeah, you don't want it in the head. Any other questions? Cool. So instead of alert, you can also do prompt, which asks the user to enter in something. So if we say prompt, it says hello James, we can just type in anything here. And yeah, if we wanted to capture the result from prompt, because it's a function, we can say let answer equal to prompt. And then if we answer, you can say like hello back. And in the console, we said hello. And let's do this again. Let's say like, you'll see we get the same result back. Now, let's say we wanted to convert the answer. Let's say we were asking for your age, for your name, and we wanted to convert this to a number, right? So if we do this right now, it'll look like a number, right? If we say like 18, we get a number, but it's not really a number, right? If I do console.log answer +2, or actually let's do less plus. Let's say, like, to be more intuitive, let's do +2. Okay. You see that it says 182. And the reason is that answer right now is a string. So it's going to be performing string addition on this. So we get 182 instead of 20. So the solution to this is we can use the function parseInt to convert this into an integer. Alexander, could you like maybe elaborate on what you mean? Like, do you mean if we can like show the like if we can put in JavaScript? Okay, I see what you mean. So we want to like replace the text, like let's say we had okay, yeah, let's say we had age or something. We'd say like, and then inside here we put like 18 or something. So you mean like if we want to replace 20. If we want to replace this with text, okay, yeah. So that is something you can definitely do, and that's the next thing we're going to be doing right now. So if you see on the at the bottom over here, so let's just skip to that then. We can get an element by its ID, and we can set different properties of it to different things, right? So that would let you replace the thing. So let's give this an ID of like user age, and let's say this. Okay, so we do document like we'd say like let element is equal to document.get element by ID. Then we give it the ID, which is user age. And then if we do the inner HTML, we can set it to our answer. So we set this to 20. You'll see this now becomes 20. And if we make this like, becomes that. Does that help, Alexander? Cool. Now you can also do parse float, which lets you parse like decimal numbers. Okay, so like if we just do parse in right now and say like 4, it becomes 3. But say we want to keep the decimal, we can just do parse float. Then we get like 3.5. Now another newer way of doing it is just to use the number function. This also will convert it to any number. Or like, cool. So now let's go over a quick challenge. And since we're running a bit short on time, I'm just going to go through constructing it. And then I encourage everyone to go back and try it out by themselves. Okay, so the goal here is to create a simple calculator that like prompts the user for 2 numbers and an operation and then displays the output. So we're going to let them either add, subtract, multiply, or divide numbers. And we're going to be doing the bonus, which is using text boxes and drop downs. So in this process, I'm also going to be showing you a couple of other tags that we can use in HTML. So starting off with the head, let's make this nice. And we can say the title of the page is Simple Calculator. And then open the body. And this might be new to you, but there's we can do something called an input tag that lets users enter text into the website. And we're going to give this an ID of number 1 for the first input. So let's just see what we have right now. So we have this little box where users can type anything, right? That's pretty cool. And we want them to be able to, so this is going to be the first number in their operation, right? If we wanted them to add like 2 numbers, this is where the first one's going to go. So something else we want is we also want them to be able to select which operation they want. So this selection thing is another example of an HTML tag, and then you can give different options here. So you can see that there's a lot of different HTML tags and elements. So if you refer to the W3 Schools documentation, you should be able to find all of them. So I'm just going to copy and paste this a couple of times. Right. So we want plus, minus, multiply, and divide. And you'll see here, this is kind of like a drop-down kind of thing. I'll zoom in a bit so you can see it. But yeah, you can pick between these different options. And then finally, we want one more closing input tag for the second number. And then now we have this little thing. So right now, if we just do 1 plus 3, nothing happens. So there's another element in HTML called the button that is a button, and this lets you essentially have a button. So let's say calculate. So now there's a nice little calculate button over here. But you'll see that right now it's not really doing anything, which is not what we want, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to say, this is like another like attribute of the button thing. We can say on click, we want to run a JavaScript function. And what we want to do is we want to run the run function. I just call it run. Cool. So whenever you click this button, it's going to run the run function. So okay, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to put everything in line with the JavaScript just so it's easy for you to see. Right, so we say, and this is how you declare a function JavaScript. We say function run and console.log running calc. If we open the browser console, if we click calculate, you'll see that it's printing running calc over here. So every time we click the calculate button, it's going to be running this run function over here. Everyone clear so far? Cool. So now let's go through how to actually have some logic in here so that when you add two numbers, it actually adds them. So to actually display the final output tag, sorry, the output answer of this, we're going to have a p tag. We're going to give this an ID of answer. And this is where the answer will be displayed afterwards. So the first thing that we want to do here is get the elements by their IDs. So we're going to call the operation here, we're going to call it the operation selector, and we're going to get it by ID, get element by ID, and the ID of it is operation. And then the actual operator, so the way that you get the selected item from here is by doing this, which is opSelector.options. So options is an array, and we want to do opSelector.selected index, and then do .text to get the actual text. Now, this really looks a bit of like a mouthful, but it's one of those things that if you just Google like how to get the options from a selector in JavaScript, it will probably pop up with some website, and it will be easy for you to refer to different documentation sources. So if we log the operator right now, what's going to happen is, right, so right now it's on plus, we can do minus, times, divide, right? So we're getting pretty close here. And next thing we want to do is get the numbers. Now, because we can be dealing with both floating point numbers, the ones with decimals and integers for this calculator, we're going to convert the number with the number function. But first, we're going to get the ID, which is num1. And the way we get the actual value of what's inside the input is with .value. So again, if you refer to like W3 schools or like Mozilla developer docs, you should see a wide variety of documentation sources on this. Cool. We want to do the same thing for num2. Then let's just console.log this to make everything clear. Cool. So now if we say 1 plus 3, we should say plus and then 1 space 3. Or if you do 1.5 and 3. So the next thing we need to do is actually figure out how to process these numbers, right? And the way we want to do this is we can either use, okay, so I know I used a switch on the docs, on the lesson document, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to use an if statement because we're kind of running short on time. So there's 4 different values the operation selector can be, right? So kind of like Python, you can just like say equals with strings. So if we say if the op is equal to a plus sign, what we want to do is say num1 plus num, like we want to say, okay, we want to set the, okay, so the first thing we need to do is actually get the element for the paragraph tag so we can overwrite its contents. We're going to do that by saying let answer equal to get element by ID answer. Cool. So then the way we can set its contents is by saying answer.innerHTML as I showed earlier, and let's make this num1 plus num2. Cool. So now if we're saying, like, say 1 plus 3, it will say 13. And the problem with this is the reason it's doing this and not 4 is because we haven't converted these numbers yet. So if we wrap this around the number function, it will convert it to a number. And then we should get the value we want. Oh, I forgot to reload the page. But yeah, so you'll see here we'll get 4. And this is pretty much the same deal with all the other operations. So you can say that this is equal to the multiplication symbol. We're going to semicolon. So we say 1, well, let's say 2 times 5 will be 10. And it's the same with subtraction and division. You can just do what you want to. Cool. So I know we're at the end of the time, but does anyone have any questions? Yeah. Cool. All right, so for a quick bit of review, we went over some simple HTML at the beginning. We talked about some basic tags, some layouts with like the way it's kind of ordered, and we also talked about some basic CSS and how we can make everything look nice. Yeah, so all of the code is already posted. It's on my GitHub repository for the lesson. I'll send it in the chat here. And then for JavaScript, we talked about some basic logic, kind of how the language looks like. Accessing HTML elements as well. Like we can see, we can overwrite the inner HTML of this to set the contents. Cool. Does anyone still have any questions? I can stick around for a few minutes if anyone has any. If not, I think that's the end of the workshop today. Thank you everyone for coming out. I have posted the notes and the code in the chat, as well as I think in the PDF document that you guys were sent. But yeah. Yeah, so the HTML does need the JavaScript. It doesn't need the CSS. You can see here that we actually don't have any CSS. We just have JavaScript. You're welcome, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Cool.